wonderful speaker tonight who is coming to us from the Virtue Center. Her name is Sarah West, and I know that she has got a lot of great things to share with us. So Sarah, I'm going to kill my stuff. It's all yours. Good luck.
Thank you so much. So as was just stated, my name is Sarah West. I am the adult drug court specialist here at the Virtue Center. I'm a therapist, and I work primarily with Cleveland County Drug Court, which is an alternative to incarceration program. I'm happy to share a little bit more about that if time permits. Tonight, I'm super excited to share with everyone. This is, I'm sorry, let me get my slideshow going here. This is psychological barriers to treatment and long-term recovery. So we are going to explore a lot of different topics related to this overall, I'm sorry, it looks like I'm in presenter view. There we go. Related to this overall topic of the barriers that exist to engaging in treatment and entering long-term recovery. So one of the inspirations for me to share this topic is an old, I guess it's a little bit older now than when I originally viewed it, but an old stand-up routine, or not stand-up routine, it's a sketch from Bob Newhart called Just Stop It. This was originally aired on Saturday Night Live. So many of us may be familiar with this sketch. We're not going to watch it entirely tonight due to time, but Bob Newhart is playing a psychologist, and he has this revolutionary new technique for helping clients enact change in their lives. And Catherine over here comes in for treatment services, starts telling him all about her agoraphobia and her fear of being buried alive in a box and how this is taking over her life, causing a lot of problems for her. And Bob Newhart nods and understands and says, I've got just the cure for you, looks her square in the eye and just yells, stop it. Just stop being afraid of being buried alive in a box. And it goes on for several minutes. It's very funny. Kind of example of brief intervention therapy, solution-focused therapy, reality therapy. And this is what I imagine, what I experience a lot of my clients coming in thinking that this is what behavior change looks like. They tell me, Sarah, I have decided to stop using. I don't want to get high anymore. I'm not even thinking about it. It's not appealing to me at all. I'll do all your little classes and stuff, but I'm fine. And I say, fantastic. And these are the clients that keep coming back week after week, feeling very frustrated with themselves, very confused, very embarrassed about their continued behavior. And they just simply don't understand why it is so hard for them to make these changes if they've got this mindset change that they think is all that they needed. The other inspiration for this topic is a quote that I came across many years ago now, before I even began my graduate studies. It reads, consider how hard it is to change yourself, and you'll understand what little chance you have in trying to change others. And while this seems like a pretty depressing quote upon first read, I found it to be a source of a lot of freedom and a lot of patience for me as I've worked as a clinician. And this is something I want us to remember as we move through these topics, is that we're not talking about an us versus them mentality. We're not talking about problems that people in recovery have versus our own personal problems. All human change is difficult for many reasons, which we're going to explore. And I hope that as we move through these topics, that you see elements of yourselves as we talk about some of these barriers. I know that I personally have a lot of trouble changing myself. I have trouble developing new habits, breaking old ones, making lifestyle changes. So I hope that some of these speak to us individually as well as to the experiences that we've had with our loved ones. All right, so here's our roadmap for the evening. We are going to start with the fact that our brains are wired for addiction. Then we're going to move into some of the physiological obstacles that early recovery presents. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into some subconscious defense mechanisms. We're going to talk about how change happens in stages, some common justifications for relapse, some common reasons for self-sabotage, some irrational belief systems that we all engage in, and of course the function of shame. So let's jump into our brains are wired for addiction. So the human brain is an incredible machine. I am more and more impressed with it every time that I study it. And it's primarily what has helped us survive as humans for as long as we have. Unfortunately, there are elements of it that do make it harder to enact behavior changes, specifically in recovery. So here's our brain on drugs. It's not my favorite depiction of the human brain, but it does label everything that I needed it to. So this is what we have this evening. My impression is that many of us have seen brain scans like this, are at least marginally familiar with how the brain works in addiction. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that tonight, although I probably could talk about it for about 5 to 6 hours if somebody let me. But in general, this is what our brain does with dopamine and how it works in what's called the reward pathway of the brain. So you see this little white dot in the middle here. That is our I always say this wrong, ventral tegmental area. We call it the VTA, and that's what produces our dopamine. This is all kind of a very rough idea. So that's where our dopamine is produced. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that causes us to feel pleasure. So where that dopamine goes from there is what makes it so hard to make behavior changes. Number one, it goes to our hippocampus. So that is what creates hyper memories. Hippocampus is responsible for creating and storing memory. And the fact that dopamine fires with drug use is what causes us to have hyper memories of drug use. That dopamine also goes to our amygdala. Our amygdala deals with conscious feelings. So that's where we feel happiness, excitement, anticipation, relief, all of those feelings that go along with dopamine production. Dopamine also goes to our nucleus accumbens, which helps us build reward pathways, helps us remember which things caused a reward, which things cause a consequence. And it also gets pushed onto our frontal cortex. So in general, that frontal cortex is what makes logical decisions, problem solving, long-term thinking, all that good stuff. Over there on our right-hand side is what we call our hindbrain. Some theorists call it the lizard brain, the ancient brain, whatever you want to call it. That's our survival brain. The front of our brain makes decisions and is the responsible one. The back of our brain is simply responsible for keeping us alive moment to moment. So that is why when I'm in active addiction, all I can do is make short-term survival-based thinking choices. I can't really expand or zoom out to long-term consequences or think about others around me. I'm focusing on surviving, and that's what drugs cause my brain to do. All of this also leads to strong triggering, strong craving. This is not something that our brain can choose to not do, which is why it's so counterintuitive to say, I've just decided I'm not going to use anymore, because you can't just decide not to crave. You can't just decide not to be triggered. So our number one barrier is just our physical brain itself. Our number two barrier to maintaining long-term recovery and maintaining treatment is some physiological obstacles that are inherent in early recovery. So the number one stage that's going to be a problem is our withdrawal stage. So anyone who's experienced withdrawal in any capacity, whether that's I was trying to quit smoking, I tried to quit caffeine or a substance like alcohol or drugs, you're going to know what I'm talking about when I talk about withdrawal. So these are symptoms like poor concentration, memory problems like encoding new memories or recalling old memories, lots of mood instability and insomnia or hypersomnia. So either I'm sleeping a whole lot or not at all. So if all those symptoms make it sound like it'd be really easy to participate in a treatment program where I have to pay attention and remember things and remember who my therapist's name is or what time my appointment is at, that's not a good combination with all these withdrawal symptoms happening. It's a huge barrier to beginning a new treatment program when I've already got all this withdrawal going on. Number two most problematic stage is our honeymoon phase. So once that withdrawal kind of fades off, it usually takes about a week to 2 weeks to get through that phase, depending on the substance, you're going to hit that honeymoon phase. So I'm feeling so much better. Sobriety is awesome. I don't need these therapists anymore. I don't need these meetings anymore. I'm going to tear up my sponsor's number. I'm cured. I don't know why it's so hard for everybody else, but I'm fine. So that's a huge obstacle, is our brain kind of tricks us into walking away from the things that got us to this point. And then we end up hitting that wall. So some of us are probably familiar with this wall stage. It's when the honeymoon phase kind of burns off. Around 90 days, that's the most common point. That's one of the most common points of relapse. And it can be characterized by this experience of hedonic allostasis. So if that term is unfamiliar, it's basically this concept that our brains build tolerance to dopamine. So we all have an activating threshold for dopamine, and usually normal things will make us feel happy. Going to the park, playing with the dog, eating an ice cream cone, and that does the trick. It hits that dopamine threshold and we feel happy. But when I start way overstimulating that dopamine threshold, I have to raise that threshold for what it takes to make me happy. My brain says, whoa, okay, that's way more than I was ever meant to handle. Now it takes this much to make you happy. So I have to keep using my substance to get up there. And then when I get sober, I come back down here and I do normal things again. I go to the park, I eat an ice cream cone, I play with the dog. Do I feel happy? No, because my tolerance went up. My activating threshold is still up here. It takes about a year to a year and a half for it to come back down to normal. That's what people experience when they hit the wall, is this feeling of just blah. Nothing's fun, nothing's exciting. And they say to themselves, why did I make this change? Why did I get sober? Life's really boring now. So that's another challenge to staying in treatment and staying in recovery. All right, now we're going to go a little bit deeper into some subconscious defense mechanisms. So this is from our old friend Sigmund Freud. I'm only going to touch on a couple of them. He had about 15 of them. His daughter Anna Freud developed a lot more. So we're just going to touch on a couple of them. Number one, everyone's super familiar with this one, is denial. It's just this basic concept of my brain simply doesn't acknowledge that the problem exists. It's a great way to deal with things. Just pretend it's not happening. 2 points I want to make on denial is actually the first stage in our stages of grief. There's 5 of those. They were developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And I think this is important to note because I don't think many people think of recovery as a form of loss or a form of grief, but all change, anytime I encounter a change in my life, that's going to involve loss, and all loss involves some type of grief. Even positive changes like winning the lottery, I'm going to go through a lot of loss when it comes to that. And that's part of what my clients and our loved ones are experiencing when they go through recovery, is they're going through a stage of grief. And the other point I wanted to make is about confirmation bias. So this is an element of denial, which explains why conservative and a liberal can read the exact same newspaper and draw 2 completely different conclusions from that newspaper itself. It means that we are only aware of evidence that supports our current worldview. So this is why if I have the worldview that I do not have a problem with drugs and alcohol, everything is fine, then I am only going to be able to be consciously aware of evidence that supports that worldview. So I'm going to pay attention to the fact that, hey, I'm fine. I still have my job. I haven't been fired yet. And I'm going to completely ignore the evidence that I do have a problem. So yes, I do still have my job, but my children won't talk to me. I'm about to be evicted. I've showed up late to that job every day for the past week, and everyone's getting in screaming matches with me. I'm not even consciously aware of those things because they don't support my current idea that I'm fine. All right, here's a little bit of denial humor for us. This is Ross from Friends, engaging in denial. And of course, denial is not just a river in Egypt. I can't talk about denial without using some memes. All right, next in our defense mechanisms is projection. So this one I actually encounter. I would be willing to bet I encounter this every single day. So this is simply attributing one's own unacceptable thoughts or feelings onto another person. So this is if my teenager comes up to me and says, hey, you hate me and think that I'm lazy, when really I hate me and I think that I'm lazy. All right, next up is displacement. So this is satisfying an unacceptable impulse with something else. The classic example of this is Bob is mad at his boss, but he can't yell at his boss because he's going to get fired if he does that. So he comes home and yells at his wife. The reason I think this applies in substance abuse is because substance abuse is often conceptualized as a form of self-harm. So it's unacceptable to me to cause harm to myself or to others, but it might not be unacceptable for me psychologically to engage in substance abuse. So that's a form of displacement. We also talk about depression and other mental health conditions as anger toward anger turned inward or aggression turned inward. You'll hear that phrase sometimes. What that basically means is I have some anger or some aggression towards somebody in my life. Maybe I grew up and I always had anger towards my father or my teacher or my coach. And I was never able to express that in any way. So instead of expressing it at those individuals, I turned that inward, and now I'm expressing anger and aggression towards myself. Kind of a meta experience there, but we see it. All right, next is a defense mechanism of regression. So this is simply moving back in time psychologically when we are under stress. And we all kind of do this in some ways. I remember when I was going to college and graduating from high school, moving several states away. My favorite color had been blue for most of my teenage years, most of my middle school years. I loved blue. But then when it came time to buy all the stuff for my dorm, I bought everything in a light pink, which was my favorite color as a kid, like a young kid, 5, 6, 7. And now that I look back on it, that was regression for me. I was moving backward because I was under a lot of stress. So many people describe substance abusers as being developmentally stuck at the age that they started using at. And while that's a little bit oversimplified from a neurocognitive perspective, we do see that often in terms of having some teenage type traits, because most substance abusers begin their addiction in their teenage years. So those traits could be things like egocentrism, which is simply only experiencing the world in terms of myself and how it relates to me. It can come off looking like selfishness, but we don't say that when it comes to teenagers. They're just being teenagers. They can only think about the world and how it pertains to them. They feel like everyone's watching them all the time. They're being judged. They feel embarrassed about everything. So that's just a form of egocentrism, very natural at a teenage year. If I'm seeing that in an adult, that's probably a symptom of regression under stress. All right, and our last defense mechanism is compartmentalization. So this is me coping with unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or actions by psychologically separating oneself into discrete parts. So I observe this when my clients will refer to using me and sober me as very different people. So it's trying to put as much psychological and emotional distance between myself and the me that was causing all that pain in my addiction as possible. All right, moving on to the fact that change does not occur in an instant or in a moment. It occurs in many different stages. So this was theorized by Prohaska and DiClemente. And I like conceptualizing this in terms of something that many of us are probably familiar with, like getting into shape or getting fit. So we're going to walk through these stages of change as though I'm trying to get fit. So stage number 1, I'm in pre-contemplation. So this is where I am still unaware that a problem even exists. I might be willing to work on other things, but not the actual problem, and I'm blaming others instead of taking responsibility for making a change. So this would be, I do want to get healthy, but maybe that's just society telling me that I need to be more healthy, blaming other people instead of taking on that role of making a change. Stage number 2 is contemplation. So at this point, I know something is wrong, but I don't know what to do about it yet. I might want things to be different, but I don't actually want to take the change that would lead to that. And I'm saying one thing and doing another. So this is me saying, I really do want to get fit, but I don't know how to do that. I don't like running. I don't want to go to a gym. I want this, but I don't want to do the steps that it takes. All right, next up, hopefully I move into preparation stage. So this is where I finally admit that I do need to change. I'm accepting responsibility for my previous behavior. I start exploring some options, and I might tell others about my intention to change. So this is where I start maybe Googling some fitness routines or looking at the gyms around me, kind of comparing prices, just preparing to actually do something. All right, now eventually we have to hit stage 4, which is our action stage. I like this picture of the skydivers because I think it really conceptualizes the fact that I can pay for skydiving lessons, I can take the lessons, I can go up in the plane if I want, but eventually I actually need to jump out and do something. And I see too many of us, me in particular, kind of doing that 1, 2, 3 shuffle, pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, and then getting back down on the ground. So hopefully we hit stage 4 and make those behavioral changes. I might start accepting help from professionals or other people. Excuse me. So this is where I actually hire that personal trainer, sign up for that 5K. I'm actually doing the thing. All right, hopefully I get to stage 5. So this is our maintenance stage where I identify and implement strategies to crystallize those initial changes into long-term changes. So this is where recovery versus sobriety becomes really apparent. Recovery is where that focus turns from fighting those old behaviors into simply building a new lifestyle. So that's our difference there. And if I have not done a great job at laying that foundation in stage 5, I'm going to hit stage 6, and that is our relapse stage. So relapse simply means re-engaging in previous behavior at a level that is unacceptable in my new lifestyle that I've built in stage 5. Or I might start engaging in a different but still problematic behavior. There are some people who conceptualize a slip differently than a relapse. So what people usually refer to when they talk about a slip is it was a one-time re-engagement in behavior that I've decided to stop. It did not last very long, and it did not come with a lot of other things that I associate with being active in my addiction, versus a relapse, which people conceptualize as being a longer term thing that did involve a lot of other behavioral changes, thinking changes, emotional changes that resemble me becoming active in my addiction again. So there are people who disagree on whether a slip even exists or it's just a rationalization for engaging in a relapse. Cognitive behavioral theorists would say that if a slip occurred, so that's a behavior, then an emotion and a thought had to both come before that. And they'll also say that a relapse usually starts weeks before the actual use occurs. So some people don't believe in the existence of a slip. You're going to find different opinions based on different people in recovery. All right, so speaking of relapses and justifying those, so there are a lot of reasons that those of us who are engaging in behavior change will talk ourselves into regressing or having a relapse in that behavior change. So here are several that I hear. These can apply to both that fitness change that we talked about or in recovery in general. So number 1, it's been 6 months. I deserve a reward. Or it's been 6 months. I can handle just one now. I've had a bad day. I'm not as bad off as this other guy. So if it's the fitness thing, well, my sister hasn't run in 3 years. At least I'm doing better than her. Might be the justification that we use to kind of slip back in that fitness routine. I might say it's not a daily thing, or it's common, it's cultural, it's legal. So this change is not realistic long term. I hear a lot of my clients tell me that about alcohol. Sarah, it's not reasonable for you to ask me to not use alcohol ever again. Everybody drinks. It's not reasonable to not drink. We might use that in our fitness example of saying, look, I'm not a bodybuilder. I can't maintain this level of nutrition and fitness forever. But ultimately, these are all just justifications, kind of cognitive barriers to maintaining that long-term treatment. All right, next we've got self-sabotage. There are a lot of common reasons why we may engage in self-sabotaging behavior, either in recovery or in other changes that we attempt to make. So number 1 is an automatic belief that I simply don't deserve success. I think if some of us would get really honest with ourselves, we would say that we do kind of have that automatic belief in the back of our minds. A lot of my clients will identify that. Next is feelings of fraudulence. Some of us might be familiar with the phrase imposter syndrome. It's basically this feeling that I don't belong here. Someone made a mistake. I don't know who let me become a therapist, but I am horrible at this. And one day someone's going to figure it out. And I just don't belong here. This isn't me. A lot of my clients will describe that about recovery. They've been living in active addiction for so long. Living in recovery feels so foreign to them. Next is it actually offers a really easy scapegoat. If I can say, look, I didn't fail, I just wasn't trying. That's a reason for self-sabotage, because I know I feel like failure is going to come eventually. So I'm just going to kind of force its hand a little bit. That way I'm not as embarrassed when it actually happens. It's kind of like making fun of ourselves instead of other people making fun of us on the playground. It also provides that illusion of control. So again, forcing that hand. A lot of clients will describe to me, especially trauma survivors, that things were going too well for me. I was too happy. Things were doing too well at work or with my family. I knew it was going to end eventually. And I just woke up every day with this feeling of dread, like, oh, things are going to hit the fan someday. And what day is it going to be too much? And so we sabotage so that at least we're in control of when it happens to us. Next, it provides this illusion of comfort. We talked about regression and how we return to things that are comfortable and familiar when we're under stress. That's a common stress response. So if I'm doing great in my recovery and then one day something horrible happens, like I lose my job or I lose a family member, it's not uncommon to self-sabotage and return to that feeling of comfort that, okay, at least I know what's going to happen now. Next, some of us just have an attraction to chaos or experiencing a sense of boredom. I talked with a client once about who got to a stage in her recovery where things were really stable. She was really happy. And she looked at me and said, Sarah, is this it? Like, is this all life is? And I said, yeah, most of us just kind of feel this sense of calm, contentment, and peace much of the time. I mean, life still happens, but this is what peace feels like. And she said, huh, that's kind of strange. I don't know if I like it. It's kind of boring. And some clients will identify this. They feel bored when really they just feel at peace. And so will cause a self-sabotage to just add a little bit more drama. All right, next we have our irrational belief systems. This comes from Albert Ellis. I'm going to kind of knock these down really quickly, just because we're getting a little bit close on time, but these are common to all of us. I'm sure some of us will identify with a few of these, or at least identify hearing a version of these from our loved ones if they're in active addiction. So I must do well and to get the approval of everyone who matters to me, or I will be a worthless person. Other people must treat me kindly and fairly, or else they are bad. I must have an easy, enjoyable life, or I cannot enjoy living at all. All the people who matter to me must love and approve of me, or it will be awful. I must be a higher achiever, or I will be worthless. Nobody should ever behave badly, and if they do, I should condemn them. I mustn't be frustrated in getting what I want, and if I am, it will be terrible. When things are tough and I'm under pressure, I must be miserable, and there is nothing I can do about this. When faced with the possibility of something frightening or dangerous happening to me, I must obsess about it, make frantic attempts to avoid it. I can avoid my responsibilities and dealing with life's difficulties and still be fulfilled. My past is the most important part of my life, and it will keep on dictating how I feel and what I do. Everybody and everything should be better than they are, and if it's not, it's awful. And number 13, my favorite one, I can be happy. I can be as happy as is possible by doing as little as I can and just enjoying myself. All right, wrapping all this up, last topic is on shame. So I talk about the difference between shame and guilt pretty often. I think people tend to confuse these two. So shame is I am something bad, and guilt is I did something bad. It's a little bit different there. So our rubber band value systems are what contribute to a lot of my clients stating that they feel like they don't even know themselves anymore, and they don't understand how they got here. And briefly, what it means is we all started off as that little 6-year-old who thought that smoking was bad, and you should never cheat, you should never lie. And then eventually we did one of those things. And how did we feel? We felt a lot of guilt. Guilt is not comfortable to feel at all. So if I don't want to live in guilt, I have one of two choices. Either I can change my behavior and bring it back inside the circle of what's acceptable, or I can just expand my circle and use it to cover the thing that I did that was bad and makes me feel guilty. So I might justify it or rationalize it by saying, well, it's just cigarettes. It's really not that big a deal. It's not like it's an illegal drug or something. And then I'm going to have a beer. And well, it's just one beer. It's not even like liquor or anything. It's not that big a deal. And then eventually we're all the way out here and saying, well, I'm not shooting up every day, so it's really not all that bad. And we started off as that little girl who didn't want to smoke a cigarette. That rubber band stretched a lot further. And part of recovery is shrinking that rubber band back down to what is acceptable for me personally. So last comment on shame. Shame is defined by Brené Brown as the intensely painful feeling that we are unworthy of love and belonging. It's a very painful feeling because it's evolutionarily very important that we don't feel shame, because if we get rejected by the crowd, from an evolutionary perspective, that is like the end. I mean, back when we lived in caveman and more of a tribal society, if you were rejected from the crowd, you were most likely going to die. So rejection was not only painful like we all feel today, it actually meant death. So shame actually drives perfectionism. Perfectionism is based in this belief that I can be perfect enough, and if I can behave well enough, then I can avoid ever being criticized, ever being judged, ever being kicked out of the circle. Now, the antidote to shame is empathy. because empathy tells me, hey, no, you're not going to be rejected. You don't need to worry about that. I'm not going to kick you out of the circle no matter what you do. And this reminds me of a quote by Johann Hari, which is, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And Hari wrote Chasing the Scream. Some of us might be familiar with that book. So this is very important to remember when I'm trying to make a change, is that our natural tendency is going to be isolating. And when we have a relapse or when we get stuck in something, and we have to remember that secrets keep us sick. Our natural desire is going to put those walls up because we don't want to feel that shame or get rejected. So that's important, is to keep those walls down so that we can experience empathy and not have that shame kind of isolate us back. All right, we're going to go back to our quote really briefly. So remembering, consider how hard it is to change yourself, and you'll understand what little chance you have in trying to change others. The reason this has stuck with me so much as a clinician is that it reminds me that as hard as it is to change myself, it's impossible to change other people. And that's why I'm so grateful that my job as a therapist is not to change anybody. I love that. It's not my job to change anybody or drag them towards my idea of what success is. It's simply to extend empathy to them, to meet them where they're at, and to teach them about these barriers to achieving change, and teaching them how they can achieve change successfully. All right, well, that is all I have for us today. I think I ran the clock all the way out. Again, my name is Sarah West. I'm from the Virtue Center here in Norman. We do outpatient drug and alcohol counseling. And if you're interested in getting connected with some of our services, you can find us online, find us on Facebook, and look at our walk-in hours. So I think we are gonna pass the mic back over.
That's awesome. So it is a wonderful thing that people can go back and watch this video again on our Facebook page and on YouTube, because man, Sarah killed it. Tons of just really valuable information that I know people are going to want to re-listen to and rewatch, because it's hard to soak all that in if you're a parent or a loved one watching. So if you're watching on Facebook, check your comments section. I have put the Zoom meeting ID and the meeting password in the comments for our live Q&A. That's going to be starting very soon. If you're watching on Zoom, I have sent that to you in a message as well, the meeting ID and the passcode. So I'm going to give everybody about 15 seconds, 20 seconds to copy and paste that, to jot that down, and then I am going to kill this meeting, and I will see everybody else there in the next one. So Sarah, I will see you in the next room here momentarily. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Hopefully we see you in the live Q&A as well.